All right, let's talk about a few medical reference points with this next to last mini lecture. The last one will be about evolution. So there are mitochondrial genes that will involve the electron transport chain and or ATP synthase. And when you have one of these, remember that the chemical DNP is very powerful because it uncouples this process. These are also very powerful, but they are diseases that will have effects with your entire energy metabolism that come through your mitochondrial genes. Here's the entire mitochondrial gene map, and what it shows is in the colors you can see different things, but red, blue, and green are going to be the different complexes that are in the electron transport chain. And you see there's a lot of red, blue, and green. In fact, there's not much else, and then there's ATP synthase, which is purple. There's only a few other things. There's transfer RNA, ribosomal RNA, because it has its own ribosome, and there's not much else. Mitochondrial genes are pretty much involved with this whole chapter and this process. So if you have a mutation in one of these areas, you see that there are 4 mutations that are called LHON. That's one of our diseases. Those will cause problems with your electron transport chain, especially with one of these 4 complexes that we have here. And then there's another one called MERRF, and that one is at the bottom. That's actually a mutation in transfer RNA. Notice that you have to have transfer RNAs for the proteins to be able to be made. For a ribosome to work, you have to have tRNA. We'll talk about that, by the way, in the last unit. But so these are essential genes for the mitochondria, and if you have a mutation in one of those, you can actually have a mutation in how the whole mitochondria works. So there are 2 diseases. Both of these are genetic and carried on by some identified mutations, although I know from personal experience from a neighbor of mine that not all the mutations are understood. So disease number 1, the ones that we understand, the mutations come from complex 1 or 3. And it's called Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy. And the key word there is the O, meaning optic. The optic nerve is perhaps the most active nerve in the entire body, because there's so much information that passes down it, so much energy that needs to be made to keep that nerve running, to keep the gradients and the pulses going and things like that. So if you have a problem in your mitochondria, it will show up there first. And so in fact, as small as a single base pair mutation, it causes an arginine to histidine mutation, but it's the wrong arginine being changed to the wrong histidine. And they actually, there's actually a risk factor of cigarette smoke causing this. It's possible that oxygen toxicity might actually cause some of these mutations. They are definitely somehow connected to redox and to just the general damage that mutations can do. However it happens, and remember there are several different mutations that were shown just on the wheel that we showed you a second ago. Complex 1 is messed up. It can't do its job. It can't really pass electrons on, and the door to NADH is closed. So you can only get electrons. You can still get in through the other doors, and in most tissue, actually, you can get enough energy from the back doors, the side doors that we talked about. But it's where you have the high demand tissue, and the highest of the high demand tissue is the optic neurons, and blindness will result from that. The same disease actually results from a mutation in complex 3, and if you look at this, they're wondering why that would be. One of the suggestions is that it actually affects the way the supercomplex comes together, the respirosome, because it will mutate something like the interface with complex 1, so they can't hold together as well. And so it's not completely non-functional, but it's definitely impaired in function. And again, when you have an impairment in function, it shows up in the optic nerve. The reason I say that this disease was made personal is that I have a neighbor who's actually married to an old friend of mine that I know from church from 30 years ago. So we were all in the college program together. And she married a guy and moved to be a couple blocks from me. And and I would see them, and he actually had an eye degenerative disease. He basically started to go blind. And so I see him around still, but he has to wear glasses and use a cane when he walks now. And so I've been praying for him, and the prayer does not depend on me being able to understand what his mutation is, and he's even been genetically screened for these particular mutations. He does not have these mutations. In fact, what he has is another mutation, and they don't really know where or what it is. They have a few ideas from the genetic screen, but they're not sure. And so the main thing is we know that there's something going on with radicals, and there's something going on with just mitochondria not being able to do what they should. But we don't need to know exactly what's going on biochemically to be able to pray for him. And so I just want to invite those of you who are praying types to pray for my neighbor. I'll keep his name confidential, but I do want I want to be able to tell him that I'm praying for him, and I've asked those in my class to pray for him, and nobody knows but you and God. So this is not a class assignment, no extra credit. If you tell me that you prayed, great, but that's, again, this is between you and God. But he has actually, so it was going downhill fast, and it's at least holding steady now. He has a little bit of eyesight, not enough to read by. And he's figuring out how to reorder his life right now. We're still praying, so I'm thankful that it's tailed off. But now I want to pray that it gets healed. It gets rehabilitated, that his optic nerves will be able to regenerate themselves. And we know that's not a normal thing. But we also know this kind of healing is attested to in Scripture, and it's also attested to in the lives of other people that I know. And we won't receive if we don't ask. So I know you don't know him. Just say a small prayer if it's if you want to, if you choose to, and I will use this as my reminder to keep praying for him. And maybe if you see me in a couple years, you can ask me if you remember this. Feel free to ask me about my neighbor with LHON. The other disease is, at first glance, even weirder. It makes sense that you can have a mutation that messes up your complexes. This is a mutation in your tRNA. But if you think about it, the only thing that the tRNA is making is complexes. So if you have a mutation with the tRNA, it could mess up the complexes as well. And in fact, this results in a tRNA that crystallizes in the mitochondria. So this is called myoclonic epilepsy and ragged red fiber disease. But you see that it has to do with nerves as well if it's epilepsy. The symptom is in the muscles. It shows up as a sort of spasm. And the mutation is in the tRNA for leucine. I think that it said lysine on the other one. I'm not going to test you on whether it's leucine or lysine, but the important thing is that it's in a tRNA. And what you realize, what you get is paracrystalline structures. This is what it looks like. And you don't have to be a cell biologist to look at this and say, it looks like there's something wrong with those mitochondria. And those mitochondria might not be able to move electrons, to pump protons, or to make ATP as well as they should, because they've got these big crystals of tRNA that have formed inside them. It's a little bit like sickle cell, except it's with crystals of tRNA, not fibers of hemoglobin. But you get the idea. This is bad news, and this shows up as a problem with mitochondria as a disease like this. Okay, that's mini lecture C.